Hello and welcome to our virtual broadcast of Bridging Emergency Management with Cyber Utilities, Intelligence Media, and more. This is presented by David Stuhan and Brett Hansard. Brett is the manager of the Argonne National Laboratory Risk and Crisis Communication Program. Brett has been with Argonne since 2003 and has a deep and varied background in emergency public information. David is the CEM division leader for LANO's Emergency Management Division. David has more than 22 years of professional and leadership experience in emergency management, security management, emergency services, disaster recovery, and homeland security. We may or may not have time at the end of this session for some questions and answers. So if you'll make sure you put your questions in the chat box to the right, I can either forward these to our speakers, or you can also find their emails in the speaker tab on our application. And with that, join me in welcoming David and Brett, and we're going to roll their presentation.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Dave Stuhan from Los Alamos National Laboratory. I also have Brett Hansard from Argonne National Laboratory. We're doing a joint presentation today. We're talking about bridging emergency management with cyber, utilities, intelligence, media, and more. Next slide. So in summary, we're going to talk about the GridEX national level exercise, how you can leverage that framework at your site to get some non-traditional hazards integrated into your emergency management program with less effort, because a lot of planning is done at the national level. We're going to talk about how the exercise plan and the master scenarios event list can be integrated. We're also going to talk about intelligence sharing and dissemination, both before an event happens and when an event happens. We're also going to talk about intelligence and social media and how they intertwine. We're also going to talk about non-traditional hazards or impacts such as cyber events and utilities. And then we're going to talk about Brett Hansard's favorite subject, which is mock media. Next slide. So the GridDeck national exercise, LANO participated back in 2017, and then we also participated this last year in 2019. What is GridEX? It's an unclassified large-scale electricity grid security and crisis response exercise. A lot of cyber, a lot of utilities, a lot of physical attack scenarios that you can integrate into your scenario. This actual national level exercise really allowed us to look at cyber utility incidents, physical attacks or active threats, intelligence, as well as media. We really focused on intelligence gathering. We looked at incident management and coordination, both out in the field and within our emergency response centers, such as EOCs, Joint Information Centers, as well as our power control centers, which is something a little different than your normal exercises. We looked at emergency notifications, internal and external communications and collaboration, critical decisions, as well as that emergency public information piece. You can apply a graded approach to the exercise planning, conduct, and evaluation. You can basically crawl, walk, run when you participate in these exercises. That's what makes it great. Next slide. So as far as the exercise plan and master scenario events list, everybody knows it as MESL. You can be a passive or an active participant in GridEX. It happens every 2 years. So you can be fully integrated into the national framework and the national MESL, or you can simply have your exercise on the side, but you're leveraging all their planning elements. The exercise plan starts with you getting participation approved through your field office representative. There's a national level exercise planner that's assigned. They share fact sheets, planning materials, their exercise plan, and more. Everything you need to build your exercise, they give it to you in a nice little basket. For the MESL, the lead planner will provide you a detailed MESL for the basis of your exercise, but then you simply adjust the timeline however you need based on your graded approach. So there'll be a timeline with expected actions. You can integrate intelligence and threat intelligence information, exercise messages, as well as those social media messages. The national level planner will provide you a diverse set of exercise messages and injects to support your graded approach participation, and really they can be tailored to meet your needs. And next slide. So for intelligence sharing and dissemination, so we did a warm start. So we established pre-intelligence information to give participants some background and really that intelligence before the exercise begins. It kind of gives them a basis for what's going on in the world, what's going on in the United States, what's going on in your region or at your site. And then we also established an intelligence plan, a detailed plan and products for dissemination during the actual exercise conduct. The intelligence is based on the national level framework and products that they provide, as well as what you tailor them to meet your needs at your site. It really integrates sharing this intelligence across emergency management, law enforcement, security, utility stakeholders, which are non-traditional players in exercises, as well as those cybersecurity stakeholders. One thing that's important, ensure you have an exercise control cell to manage and coordinate the dissemination of those intelligence messages. Ensure you have controller evaluators in place to monitor how that information is shared across the stakeholders. Because again, it's very diverse. It could be across emergency management, law enforcement, security, utilities, and cybersecurity. You can have these intelligence messages that are pre-built that are from the FBI, Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate. They can be from the Department of Homeland Security and a wide variety of other agencies. And they could be from your local fusion center for your region. Next slide. So I'm about to show you a pre-exercise intelligence clip. Argonne National Laboratory put this together for us. This really set the stage, and other than giving a piece of paper to participants, they were able to put these videos together, and this is just a small clip. And this really got the players excited to be part of this exercise and really got them engaged. We'll go ahead and play that clip for you.
It's not just your individual privacy at risk. America and its critical infrastructure are very vulnerable.
What we've got is a map showing industrial control systems that are exposed to the internet.
Power stations, water systems, telecom,
That's it, all of the aforementioned.
A man was spotted by a security guard and takes off in a rented...
FBI and DHS officials say that the capability to execute attacks using drones to conduct wireless reconnaissance is a growing threat.
The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that clip. Again, that's just a snippet of what Argonne National Laboratories can do for you for that pre-intelligence information. And you can do that at your site. Let me talk now about intelligence and social media. So sharing intelligence across your stakeholders can be difficult, even during pre-incidents, and it's even more difficult during incidents. The question is, have you tested that capability at your site? I challenge you to do so. Social media can also include real-time intelligence or threat information. When we did the exercise in 2019 for GridEX, we posted on the LANL Twitter account. It was simulated, but it really went unrecognized as a potential threat or even valuable intelligence information. Our emergency public information folks just didn't know how to recognize that information, what it meant, and actually who to give that to. So I challenge you to take a look at your ERO, look at your emergency public information folks, and do they really know how to assess that threat information? Is it valuable intelligence? And who do they get that to so people can take action on it? The other piece is how will your public information officers handle those threat actors posting on company-sponsored social media platforms? Do you automatically shut it down? Do you address the information, or do you just leave it alone? You should probably have protocols in place before this ever happens. Next slide. Cyber and utilities are non-traditional threats, but they're super important. We integrated these into GridEX. We put malware on our industrial control systems, basically our power control center systems. You can see up in the right corner, we had errors on the SCADA systems, the utility system. We had anomalies and power outages. We also had physical destruction of property on site at substations. If you see exercise message 24 on the screen, somebody actually cut the fence and actually went in and vandalized the substation. We also integrated phishing emails and advanced persistent threats. We also had ransomware attacks. You can see where we basically had a ransomware attack on the network, and they wouldn't give us those files back unless we paid a Bitcoin. You have policies in place on whether to pay those Bitcoins or those ransoms. How do you handle those? Who makes that decision? If you haven't tested it, you probably should. We also had an external web page that was defaced. The other question is do you go ahead and let that run? Do you shut down your website? How do you counter that when that occurs? The integration of real-time cyber and utilities, even though they're non-traditional threats, they're certainly new emerging threats that we should all think about. If you participate in GridEX or a like exercise, these are the things that I would challenge you to integrate into your exercise and make sure they're part of your planning process and integrate it into your policies, your plans, and your procedures. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to my pal, Brett Hansard, to talk about mock media and LANL GridEX. Over to you, Brett.
All right. Hey, thanks very much, David. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about simulated media, what we also refer to as mock media. This involved both the engagement that we had with players during the exercise, as well as the work we did with the design team before the exercise to help develop and then implement those real-time threat messages that David talked about. First, I just kind of want to give a quick overview of what we typically do in an exercise as mock media. Our goal is to make it the most challenging and realistic exercise environment we possibly can for players. In other words, we want to make things really, really hard for them. We role play what the news media and the public would be saying and doing in an emergency. This includes making social media posts, developing print, radio, and video news stories, visiting locations in the field where activities going on, like a JIC or an EOC, a hospital maybe, accident scenes. We interview players on camera. And there's also phone calls during all this being made from a simulation cell. We pre-script some of these stories and social media posts in advance of the exercise. These are typically kind of the big picture injects that establish the major parts of the scenario. Maybe like reports of a fire or an explosion or maybe a shooting, really anything that kind of gets the scenario started or moves it along. The chart at the lower left on this slide lists all of the stories we created for GridEX in advance of the exercise. So you can see that there was a lot to keep track of. In addition to these pre-scripted stories and posts, we also develop injects in real time. These are based on what we learned directly from players during the exercise play. So while a pre-scripted story might say that there'd been a cyber attack, it's really up to the players to determine what they're going to do about it and then to tell us what they're doing. And just like real reporters, we report whatever information we gather. To share these news stories, we use a secure exercise platform called the Exercise News Network, or ETN. You'll see a link at the bottom right of this slide. If you can go back, if you have a chance later, and click on that, learn a little bit more about ETN and how that site works. For social media posts, we use the real actual social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter primarily. We set these up before the exercise in a very specific kind of way, so all of the information on there is protected and only other exercise participants can see it. Obviously, we don't want to have a situation where exercise-related information is getting out into the real world and having people be confused about whether or not there's really an emergency or not. And of course, as David alluded to, all of this requires extensive coordination with the planning team in the months leading up to the exercise. It's critical that what we're saying and doing as mock media complements and syncs with all those other elements of exercise play. user error there. So what made this particular exercise unique was the extensive number of injects with threat messages that were developed before the exercise. On the left, you can see what one of those written injects look like. I think all told, there was something like 15 or 20 of them that were developed beforehand, each containing new and different threats from a variety of different fictional terrorist groups. And then we in turn took these injects as mock media and used them in our reporting, particularly on the social media side. On the right on the screen, you can see an example of one of the social media posts from our ENN Exercise News Network account. It included the post on the left, which says "Fight On" from a group called Hackers 1995, as well as 3 other threats that came out around the same time from groups called Acid Burn and Cobra. In looking at these, you can probably see that it helps to have someone involved who is very creatively inclined. These particular messages were so realistic and almost diabolical that I was scared at times to ask David exactly what his inspirations were. But you're really only limited by your imagination and by how difficult you want to make things for your players. And maybe if 2020 has shown us anything, it's that we can't possibly make things too hard for players in an exercise, because real life, it looks like it's always going to be just a little bit more challenging than we might have anticipated. Anyway, the goal in posting these is to hopefully compel the public affairs team to catch the post as part of its media monitoring operation, and then to respond as appropriate. That's easier said than done, of course. A response might require further coordination and contact between the JIC and the EOC, maybe headquarters. Maybe you have to work with some off-post agencies. In looking at this post, just think about how you might respond. Are these groups legitimate? Are the threats real? How would you even know? It's really hard to say, and players have to go forward with less than perfect information. But again, that's very similar to what we see in real life. It's very rare that you know everything you need to know, and you still have to go forward and make decisions. So this is a great opportunity to practice something difficult, but in a safe environment. I also want to show some quick examples of other mock media engagement that occurred throughout this exercise, because it was quite extensive. In addition to the pre-scripted social media injects, we also engaged with players in real time. Again, those were based on what happened as the exercise unfolded. On the left on this slide, you'll see a tweet from Lanel about shots being fired, which generated more questions from the public. And then on the right is a Facebook post from Lanel, and then there's another one from the mock media. I'm not sure if you can see the response to the Lanel post, but a person responds and says, "I'm getting mad. No one is answering phones, and no one is telling us what's going on." Again, which is pretty close to real life. We also produced more than a dozen video news stories, as well as broadcasting the exercise news conference live. I'm going to show a short clip now of one of those video news stories to see what that looked like for this exercise.
From the ENN studios, I'm Jacob Singer with breaking news. Those problems we've been reporting on today in New Mexico and in other parts of the country have now made their way to Los Alamos National Laboratory, a highly secure Department of Energy research facility about 60 miles north of Albuquerque. ENN has just learned the lab's Emergency Operations Center has been activated due to threats against the site. At this point, we don't know the nature of those threats or if they're related to the other attacks we've been covering this morning. We also just discovered that the main laboratory homepage has apparently been hacked. This image is currently being displayed on the lanel.gov website. The posted image reads in part, quote, "Your site was part of my security test, and I have come to the conclusion your security sucks," end quote. It is unclear who is responsible for the hacking. We are in the process of reaching out to DOE and local officials for additional information. Any threat against Los Alamos National Laboratory is sure to be taken seriously. The lab experiments with and stores nuclear materials, so there is no shortage of hazardous, potentially deadly agents on site. More than 10,000 people work at the laboratory, which covers a huge amount of land, almost 25,000 acres. We have a news team on the way to the scene, so stay tuned to ENN for continuing coverage. From the ENN studios, I'm Jacob Singer.
That reference to the Lanel website being hacked, that was another one of those pre-scripted threat messages that David talked about that we, again, implemented during the exercise. This slide has the headlines for all of the print news stories we developed. On the right, you can see a couple of those print stories from the ETN site. One is headlined "Explosions at Albuquerque Power Stations." The other says, "Social media posts encourage more attacks." And finally, this last slide, this shows the radio news stories we developed. I'm going to end by just playing one of those radio clips. It's headlined, "New Mexico Attacks, Is Lanel Being Targeted Too?"
I'm Jacob Singer, News Talk Radio 106.7. Breaking news. New attacks, this time in New Mexico. Attacks on power generators in Albuquerque. One in North Albuquerque and the other in South Albuquerque. No direct evidence the two are linked. 2 people have been hurt. Who is behind it is still the big question. This comes on the backdrop of several attacks across the country against utilities. Also, at the same time, a suspicious vehicle has been spotted at the Los Alamos National Lab, a super secure facility that handles radioactive materials. Lanel is about 60 miles north of Albuquerque. I've also learned police and lab security are walking the facility right now. There was also scanner traffic. The bomb squad was en route to Lanel. The lab won't confirm that. Of course, I'll keep you in the loop. Jacob Singer, News Talk Radio 106.7.
So that's all that I had. I'm going to send it back to David and see if he has any final thoughts before we open it up to questions. So thanks very much. And David, back to you.
Yeah, I would just say thanks, Brett. And just with closing comments, I would say, have you tested your response to cyber attacks that are impacting your utilities infrastructure, combined with physical attacks as well as threat intelligence? Again, looking at how you would disseminate and share that information before an event happens, and then how would you share that information during the event? If you haven't tested that, I'd encourage you to do so. I'd go back and look at your plans and procedures and make sure that you've successfully integrated cyber components, utilities component. Talk to your power control center folks. Make sure they're aligned with how you would respond to events. And GridEX is every 2 years. There'll be another one in 2021. If you want more information, feel free to reach out to me. And again, I want to thank Brett and the Argonne team for the exceptional support on this exercise. With that, we'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Thank you for your presentation, David and Brett. We are almost out of time. I don't see any questions. We have about a minute if you'd like to post any. But what I would like to do is go ahead and send these to our speakers. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send those to me or to them directly. I don't want to cut it off before I get any. I cut one off a little too early last week. Lots of questions came in afterwards. So it looks like we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us. You will notice that this is the last presentation on this channel today. We have 2 more days of full presentations. We hope you'll join us. We hope you'll join us tonight for our social hour, mocktail or cocktail. And check out the other channels. We do have some subcommittee meetings going on. And again, thank you for participating.